Welcome to another Wisdom podcast. We have Kelli Richards with us. She is a trusted advisor, super connector, media tech innovator, the bridge between Hollywood and Silicon Valley. So I'm honored to have her on the pod. One of her mentor was Steve Jobs himself. So we're going to discuss about that today and a whole array of other interesting topics for you guys. This podcast is brought to you by podfire.com. That is my podcasting agency. If you want to start, scale, be invited to podcasts like this one, or even find sponsors, you can connect with super folks like Kelli. You can grow your network. You can also get leads and subscribers from podcasts if done well. So I help you monetize the whole podcasting ecosystem. Podbuyer.com for that. Kelli, welcome to the pod. Can you tell me a bit more about yourself and about what you're up to nowadays?
Well, that's a pretty broad question, Charles. What would you like to know more specifically?
What's your day-to-day like? What occupies your time and your energy?
Day to day. Well, I like to say at the highest level that I work on cool things with cool people, but I know that sounds a little flip. It really is the truth. I'm at any given day, I'm either advising a rock star or helping create amazing connections between founders, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the tech world. I enjoy working with innovators and creatives across the board. They typically are more experienced and successful by the time we start working together. And what we do is, at any given day, we're on conversations doing creative problem solving about big issues they're dealing with, helping them clear obstacles and accelerating where they say they want to go with my network, with my insights, with visions and possibilities, ideas they haven't had themselves, and really just getting themselves out of their own way so that they can achieve their next big objectives.
Right. And basically for your career, you had the opportunity to work with a bunch of interesting people. Tell us about the highlights of your career and mentors that impacted you and in what way.
Certainly. Well, I was someone who had always been a visionary from a very young age, and I grew up in Silicon Valley, was born more in the Hollywood world, and always had a vision for bridging those two. And in fact, have done just that throughout my entire career. When I was a teenager here in Silicon Valley, where I live now, is my hometown. I mean, I grew up here pretty much. It was also where Steve Jobs was growing up. And so he would frequent the same cafes that my mom and I did, kind of hippie granola, vegetarian type places. And in high school, I was in a group called Future Business Leaders of America. We were tapped to find mentors who inspired us locally. And there was only one name on my list, and that was the Wonka man himself. Because, of course, Apple was the Wonka factory in my hometown, growing up literally right there. So I did approach Steve. He agreed to become my mentor, and that relationship lasted until he passed and shaped my entire life view, how I see the world every day, how I operate and move in the world, how I think, how I make decisions. And of course, it opened up all manner of possibilities. I had wanted to be a record producer. I was the wrong gender and couldn't get arrested in a job like that. So I wound up working as a young what's called an A&R exec out of the record label, the Capitol Records Tower in Hollywood. And that started my career as one big toehold in the music industry. And then I got tapped to launch the original music and entertainment division for Apple, which I did. Came back from Hollywood to Cupertino and launched that group. It was just me and a few other ragtag folks. And we were responsible for creating all the relationships and managing them in Hollywood with the music and film industry, with artists, with label execs, with filmmakers, and making sure they chose the Macintosh as their platform of choice. All of that led to what would become the consumer-facing solution years later with iTunes. And so people often say, gee, there was a focus on music and entertainment before iTunes. Yes, there was. You're looking at the bricklayer and the original visionary. Now, during those years, Steve was not there. He was running Next and Pixar. But I predicted, and in fact, we stayed in touch, of course, the whole time. I predicted he would return to Apple, and I got laughed at by everyone all the way up the chain. He was never going to come back. He was running two other companies. And they didn't understand that in the hero's journey, it was his company to kill or keep. But when he came back, and I was thrilled that he did, he told me point blank, I got bad news for you. We're not going to focus on music and entertainment for a while. I got to get this company back on its feet. And it was 5 years after he came back before the launch of iTunes. So I went a mile down the road and started my consulting practice, basically doing what I was doing at Apple, except now working with all manner of funded startups all the way to Fortune 100 companies as a sort of SWAT team strategist and business development super connector, envisioning possibilities for emerging technologies and new business models between Hollywood and Silicon Valley. And then wove in this trusted advisor role on top of that I just talked about. So that's what I've been doing all these years.
Hollywood seems to be, yeah, it's definitely entertainment, and Silicon Valley is tech, and you're merging entertainment and tech. How
And often there was a fear around that, especially from the entertainment companies, because their models of how they worked for 50 years were getting upended because of new technologies. And it still goes on that way, even now with the writer's strike and all of the actor's strike. What are they afraid of? That AI is going to take over their jobs. Every wave of new technology displaces a set of jobs and creates new ones. And so I've had to sort of help be in the middle of all of that time and again. When the internet became fast, when there was mobile, XR, AR, VR, Web3, and now here we are with AI. So it just doesn't stop. It's the same model over and over and over again. Right. And I didn't answer your question, Charles, about the importance of mentors. I want to go back and finish that. Yeah. As I mentioned, Steve was truly pivotal, obviously, and still is. Still is. The way I look at the world, aesthetic lens constantly. That's not right. That doesn't look right. Everything he taught me is still very much a part of how I operate in the world. But I was privileged to have a couple of other mentors along the way as well. And they were always world-class, top of their game. One, in fact, I still have two that are pretty much what the age Steve would be if he were still alive in their 70s. And they're both named Alan, and they both come from New Jersey, and they both are world leaders. And that's where and they're the same age, but that's where all the similarities stop. One of them is very much on my spiritual, holistic, personal growth side of my advisory work. That's Alan Cohen in Hawaii. The other one is Alan Weiss, who advises consultants on how to work remotely and how to be high net worth, how to serve people at a very high level on a business basis. So that's kind of the confluence of my world, is this multidimensional orientation of work, bringing in the spiritual with the business, practical with the heart, brain and head, and heart, and then practical experience outward in the world. So inside and out, upside and down. That's how I serve my clients in a very holistic way.
The spiritual side, how does that come about? Because Steve was spiritual, but he was known to lack EQ and tact, and I'm also that way. What do you have to say about that?
Well, we are spiritual beings in human bodies. That's the first thing I want to say about that. And even the best of us have human qualities that are less than desirable under certain circumstances. But I am a visionary like Steve was. And when you have that, it's like a direct hotline in a spiritual way. You get ideas and visions that people don't understand where they're coming from. And it's your job to make sure you never let go of that vision until it actually manifests. Steve never let go of his vision for Apple. All the years he was sent on his hero's journey and kicked out, he never lost sight of what was possible. And that was one of the big things he instilled in me. So I help my clients that way even now, is to see the impossible, what seems like it's impossible, and even come up with ideas that they cannot envision for themselves, and clear those out of the way so that they can move forward with peace of mind, freedom, and actually achieve what they say they want to achieve on a much more aspirational level. That's the power of bringing spirituality in. And another example of that is the Beatles, for example. When Paul and John were in their 20s, I'm a Beatleologist. It's one of my hobbies. How does someone who's 21 years old write a song like In My Life or Yesterday that are timeless, that sound like they were written by men in their 60s or 70s? How do they do it while waiting poolside for the other in 5-10 minutes, a half an hour? Timeless songs. They're channeled spiritually. They were receptive to receiving those songs, and they come through them, and they're timeless. That's the only explanation. So spirituality is embedded in creativity. There's no doubt about that. And that applies to creative content in Hollywood as well as technology innovations.
Listening to In My Life, I didn't know that one, oddly enough. I'm no Beatologist, but I was definitely a fan. What you mean by that is probably flow state and connecting with a source of energy that defies the laws of physics, sort
And
of.
being
So
receptive to allow it to come through.
open the mind. And how do you do that in your case? And how did Steve did it?
Well, Steve and I both, I can't, I would hate to speak for him, but I know he was a meditator. I am too. It does come down, you hit the nail on the head, Charles, to getting yourself in a flow state and a state of receptivity to allow what wants to come through. Could be as simple as profound as an example I'll give you. When I was working as one of the producers on a Michael Jackson concert in New York City, 2 nights prior to 9/11, I did not go to New York. I had an intuition. This is another thing Steve taught me, is to pay attention to my intuition. I had a powerful intuition that I should not go to New York. And that was going to be a career highlight for me, to work with Michael on that concert, right? When I watched the second tower fall on TV with my grandmother in California in real time, and of course we were just sitting there frozen, I looked at my flight, my plane ticket back home that I would have been on that morning. It was flight 93, the one that crashed over Pennsylvania. So how do you explain? And Michael, of course, was crying when he found that out, because why would I not go out for that? But that you can't explain that any other way than the grace of the universe and paying attention when those whispers hit you, not waiting for the brick walls.
But yeah, one would also almost be crazy not to miss such an opportunity. So did that happen at multiple times in your life?
Oh yeah, but that's probably the most colorful example. Exactly.
Yeah, that one is quite drastic, and that really happened. You bought your ticket and you didn't go.
That's exactly right.
How shocking was that for you?
It was
you have a
bone
different
shattering.
perception of reality after that?
Yeah, definitely. It trained me never, ever to ignore those little whispers that try to step in. That how many times in a day or a year do we hit the override button when they show up? We must pay attention to those intuitive whispers. And I try to instill that in my clients as well.
And do you feel there is some science and rationality to that? It's just your brain absorbing a bunch of data and telling you signals, or it's not even?
Yeah, it's a lot, and it really comes through. Steve called it sort of a tuning fork. It's an arbiter on whether, for example, you can trust someone when you meet them, whether you want to engage with them, or whether they would be toxic, all the way to the extreme of the example I gave you. It's a sense that you have about yourself, and it's a fine tuning that you can do over time to really distill the essence of it, so it happens very fast. You don't have to think about it.
What about doing the other way around? I've been doing that on the podcast, and I've been interviewing people that my gut told me like not to. And I've been taking these challenges to expose myself to these different stressors and grow out of them.
What do you want me to say about that? I love that.
Exposure. Yeah, the exposure is one of
I like you got to keep trusting that, Charles. You got to keep trusting that. It's a discernment, right? It's a discernment. Yeah. You got to keep your filter pure and strong. And the more you can trust it, the more you use it, the more you can trust it over time. Right. And it won't steer you wrong. It'll never steer you wrong. But if you ignore it, it's at your peril.
Yeah, or just being knowledgeable about the fact that, look, I'm about to interview someone that is quite controversial and I might not agree with, but I might grow up some neuron cells out of that. I prefer that actually than talking to vanilla folks that, just say yes, yes, yes all the time. You know what?
I couldn't agree more. Much more engaging to work with people that are considered controversial, because they probably have an alternative perspective that you're not aware of or aren't paying attention to. And to your point, 9 times out of 10, you can learn something. You might even have your whole worldview shifted as a result on a matter you thought was pretty much one way.
So I guess, Netflix comes to mind when it comes to bridging Silicon Valley and Hollywood. Steve comes to mind as an individual between artistry and IQ. How do you merge both? Because sometimes artists just won't be down with the technology. Spotify is a good example, was a good example, because I think they're doing well. But yeah, if you come to an artist and you're like, hey, I can scale that, I can make you good money, sometimes they won't be down with it. So how do you do that? What's your secret
Part of the
weapon?
problem is, this is a big question. Part of the problem is, for the longest time, artists did not see themselves as empowered. The record industry was very much about the record labels, and the film industry the same. Media companies, you either worked with one of those big companies or you did not have a career. So content creators, the artists, the actors, were always at the behest of these big behemoth media companies. That then shifted about 30 years ago, where the power center went to the artist. And now it's shifted again to the fans being in the center of the power wheel. But when it became that pivot where the artist became the brand, a lot of them didn't see themselves that way. They didn't understand that technology was their ticket to more revenue, more control. Fast forward 20 years from the dawn of Napster, and they got it. They understand that now. Now, some of them even have their own venture funds investing in new technologies. And many have understood that they don't need the labels anymore. And in fact, brands, consumer brand companies, have become their new partners, where at one point you would not ever work with a brand. That was not considered cool. So it's all changed as time has gone on with technology and evolving business models.
Right, and I can think of the chain smokers that have their own funds. I think they're going to be quite...
Metallica has,
Metallica, wow.
Beyonce has, Paul McCartney has, many of them have, and a lot of people don't know it. Linkin Park had their own fund. Yeah.
Linkin Park, wow. Okay, I'm going to Google that. And
do it.
Very interesting. I like that. I have another question. We're sort of pivoting here, but you mentioned Alan Weiss, and I read his book. I believe it's called The $1 Million.
He's got about 50 books. That was his first book. That's
the most famous, I think, right? The $1 Million Consultant or Consulting.
Yes.
If I want to work with you, I'm guessing that your prices are pretty elevated because the energy you deploy is pretty concentrated. So how do you go with offering something, a solution that some folks cannot fix easily and get paid a lot in the process?
I'm not sure how to answer that question in particular, but I will tell you, I do tend to work with more established people who have had a fair amount of success, where money is not as much of an impediment. I've also worked with plenty of people who don't have a lot of money, who just inspire me to want to work with them. And because I don't have a board of directors I have to answer to, I mean, I do have a limit on how many clients I can work with at any given time, because I do it all by myself. But I'm at choice about how much I charge people and who I choose to work with. So I've earned that right. And I try to be as discerning as possible, both in terms of who I would like to work with, because it's a big investment of my time and my network. And can I really help them with what they think they need help with, and what I think they need help with, that they need to maybe understand and they can't envision for themselves. It's really my choice. I'm very discerning about that.
So let's say that I'm Bono and I have a creative block, or I would like to get on X new music platform. Can be a technical, or it can be an EQ problem. Like what do you specialize in? All. Okay.
I have very strong IQ, very strong EQ, an unbeatable network. So it really depends. And by the way, we don't just tend to work on one issue like that. We tend to work holistically. Where even is Bono getting in his way? What are some things he hasn't envisioned for his family as well as his career? What would he like to do that maybe he set on a shelf when he was a teenager? Now's the time. When I was working with Prince, he was one of my first trusted advisor clients. He wanted to do a children's book. He had a vision for one from when he first started doing music as a teenager, but it never came about that he had the wherewithal to make that happen. So that was one of the things we were talking about even a few years before he passed. And it's almost like those guys, as successful as they are, need permission to do the things that they have envisioned that they just didn't make a priority.
And I guess if, yeah, it's Prince or it's Bono, well, it's a commitment of at least 100K to get you moving.
I don't like to quote prices on podcasts, but I will say it's a significant investment. Yes.
Okay. If there's discourse in the band, I think that would be a very powerful offer, right? Because they can all pay you, all the members, and if the band breaks, well, there's no music, so production is halted. You also work with a bunch of different companies in itself, but I'm
And
guessing
tech innovators as well. Tech
innovators.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing if it's music, the strong aspect would be that you bring order and structure to musicians that tend to go in various directions, right? I can picture you doing that.
Certainly order and structure, but just as important, that's left brain. Just as importantly, right brain. Yeah. Actually being a wing woman, a thought partner, a confidant, a strategist. Have you thought about this? Here's some new ideas for how you could do these songs. How about being in this game? How about, these new opportunities with this brand that wants to work with your fans?
Right.
It's a whole strategy thing as much as, any one element.
Yeah, and with your intuition, you can pinpoint on the map. I call them energy clusters, which is
yeah, they might try to be doing a deal with Microsoft or somebody, and people in that. I'm not going to pick on Microsoft, although it's easy for me to do as an former Apple person. But sorry, I can't help myself. Whoever they might be trying to do a deal with, I might be able to step in and go, you know what? I see the dollar potential of this opportunity for you, but these people are toxic. All money is not green. I really don't feel good about you doing business with them. And I can even maybe explain a few reasons why beyond just the intuitive piece. So they need that objectivity and that third party perspective when they get too emotionally invested in something.
Interesting. And when you work with tech execs, it's on the other side, it's showing them the EQ part of the medal.
Often, yes.
Yeah, because they're very strong on IQ. Yes.
So it's often, wait a minute, are you really sure you want to let go of that C-suite executive just because you had an ego clash? Isn't it possible they could have an opinion that would change the course of the direction you want to go? And really sort of pausing them to look at creative problem solving in a new way and showing them different lenses that they aren't looking through.
Right. So with all of that being said, what are your top priorities for 2024?
They're probably not a lot different than they have been, Charles. To continue to be discerning about the people I choose to serve and co-create with, and to keep adding value to those individuals and remaining the thought leader that I am as well. I mean, I have published scores of books and articles, and I've had my own podcast that I had put aside right before podcasting exploded. I had done 300 episodes of my own show from 2010 to 2017, and then it really took off. So the thought leadership piece is important too, to keep putting out my visions and my observations and insights in the world.
Well, I'll have a meditation and I'll try to tap into Steve and your aura to bring me top wisdom for today. So thank you so much for the value you've added. Kelli, where can people find out more about you? My pleasure, Charles. And it's really simple. It's just my name.com, Kelli with an I, Richards with an S.com. And that you'll find a whole bevy of resources, my story, how to work with me, if we're a fit, the whole shebang. Thank you so much. That was Kelli Richards and Charles Cormier for another CEO Wisdom Podcast.com.